Hi everybody, my name is Jim Hemphill, and it is my great pleasure to welcome the writer and director of Manhunter, Michael Mann. Just out of curiosity, how many people here were seeing Manhunter for the first time tonight?
Oh, wow.
Pretty great, right?
Jesus.
So
That's
I guess
lucky.
I should ask, first of all, what do you have there that you brought up on stage with you?
Yes. It's actually something that I put together before I read Red Dragon, and I became interested in this whole subject matter a number of years earlier, and I did some research on, before they were called serial killers, they were called paranoid schizophrenics and acute exacerbation. And there's one person in particular, a man named Dennis Wayne Wallace, who I really based Dollarhide on. The Dollarhide that was in the novel didn't felt mechanistic to me. And so the characteristics, the backstory of Dollarhide was actually taken from somebody named Dennis Wayne Wallace, who I met about 2 or 3 times, who was in Barkerville prison, a mental institution, and we had his correspondence and learned a lot about him. He used to write me psych-type poetry and had an imaginary romance and with a lady whose name was Cinnamon Cindy, the Surfing Queen, who was a go-go dancer at the Mellow Yellow in Orange County. This is all true. And their love song in his imagination was Inagata by Iron Butterfly, which is where that came from. And but the kind of profundity of this man had to do with, which pretty much influenced everything here, had to do with the duality of him being both a killer and also battered, not just a battered child, but a battered infant, and something at the time they called Marasmus syndrome. And with the resulting devastating cratering of all self-esteem, he thought he was shit and it had no life, and coupled with a strong ego and a very dark sense of humor. And and so that sense of duality of the perpetrators being both victim and also killer, and the job of maintaining that duality and seeing it as a paradox, not a contradiction, if you intend to intercept and apprehend it. So that became very much the influence of a lot of what you saw here.
So you were thinking about this and having conversations with this guy well before you ever came across Thomas Harris's novel.
Right. Richard Roth sent me Red Dragon, and then I tried to figure out how to make a screenplay out of it, and I couldn't. And then Richard Roth sent me Red Dragon, and Harris has done such a brilliant job of inventing the character of Graham. And he had done very early research with the behavioral science unit. This is well before anybody ever heard of the behavioral science unit, who was started doing profiling. And because it was impossible to track these people, if somebody, as Graham says in the film, if somebody, there's a thief who's a burglar, his motive. His motive is cash money, and you then start working fences because he's going to. If he steals a load of furs or something, he's going to fence it for cash. You could start to predict behavior. So you could set a course where you're trying to intercept them. You could, work fences, etc. And the motivation behind somebody like this is his fantasy, and there's the cruelty, the profound cruelty, is that it's murder with indifference. The victims are means to an end to create something, and so the mission objective of Graham to build within his own imagination, to want what this person wants, the perpetrator wants, and the blowback into his own mental health and everything. that's the invention of in the novel. I thought it was quite brilliant.
And so how did Dino De Laurentiis become involved, and what was it like working for him in those days?
How did
Dino De Laurentiis?
It was originally set up with United Artists, and then Dino became a co-financer, and then eventually became the ultimate financer, and it just set up a studio in Wilmington, and so we wound up in Wilmington, North Carolina, and then one becomes the recipient of many Dino De Laurentiis anecdotes. But he was quite a charming guy. So.
Well, now, as I understand it, he was the reason why this wasn't called Red Dragon. Like, after the novel, why did you guys not stick with that title?
I had a huge fight with him because he decided that Red Dragon would be mistaken as a chop sake movie from Hong Kong. And so we fought about the title, and eventually, at the end of the day, since you owned the negative, it became Manhunter. I much would have preferred the title Red Dragon.
Well, I want to ask you about the casting, because William Peterson at this point was basically unknown. I mean, I think he had maybe done a very small part for you in Thief, and I don't think To Live and Die in LA had come out yet, so it was kind of a bold move to cast him in the lead, but he's absolutely perfect. You can't imagine anybody else as Will Graham now. So how did you come to cast him, and was that a battle with Dino? Or?
No, not at all. No, at that point, by the time Dino came in, we were ready cast, and we were ready in pre-production at UA. And Billy played a bartender in Thief. And then my late dear friend Dennis Farina, at this point, we're in the middle of shooting Miami Vice in Miami, the television series, and Dennis had a role in Thief in 1980, and then he decided that he wanted to pursue acting. He started going to various theater schools in Chicago while he was still on the Chicago. He was a very heavy-duty detective in a major crime unit in Chicago. His partner was Charlie Adamson. Charlie Adamson is the man who killed the real Neil McCauley in 1963. And they all worked for somebody named Bill Anhart, who's kind of a legendary character. And Charlie, by this point, I kind of mentioned him as a writer. He wrote, created the series Crime Story, which we did during these years, and wrote a couple episodes of Miami Vice. I had Dennis in a couple episodes of Miami Vice, so it was fantastic to be able to work with Dennis and start kind of a lifelong, working relationship. He was also in luck with TV series we did at HBO with Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah, I mean, I love the casting in Thief where you have, where you basically have cops playing crooks and crooks playing cops. And I'm like, where did that idea come from? And how did you know that Farina could act? How did you know Farina could act when you cast him in Thief?
Well, anybody can act. I mean, first of all, he had he had fantastic stories, and he and Charlie Adamson were very tough cops in a very different period of time. And when they were on stakeouts, they would play various roles in movies with each other in the car. And Dennis was a fantastic, charismatic, uninhibited guy, and I put him into a couple episodes of Miami Vice, early on, and so and then he got terribly serious about it. And by the time we did this, he had done some work with the Remains Theater Company in Chicago. He'd done a couple of plays by the point we were doing Manhunter.
Well, this movie is loaded up with great theater actors, and I'm curious, is that coincidence, or do you tend to like working with actors from the stage?
I really don't know anything about theater, but working with Joan Allen, working with Dennis, working with Billy Peterson, all the they were all coming up at that point. This was like 36 years ago. I set for myself after the first thing I ever did was a Jericho Mile. It was a movie of the week in 1979, which we shot on location in Folsom Prison. in 19 days. And I knew what I wanted actors to do, and I had no idea of how to communicate to the actors. I can imagine and see in very tangible ways exactly what should be there, and I had no idea. So I decided I would put myself through acting school, and I did for a number of years. I was able to work with Stella Adler. And I was a terrible actor, and definitely behind the camera, not in front of the camera. But for me, the objective became to learn the language that this particular actor speaks in terms of acting, and it's different for every actor I've ever worked with. So in working with this particular group of actors, it was. I probably first started on intensive preparation, particularly with Tom Noonan, everybody started living their roles. So Noonan didn't want to see Billy Peterson until that final moment. Joe and Alan did a tremendous amount of work on building the sensory phenomenological reality of a blind person, starting with the human need for sensory intake. How do you take it in when you're blind? And tactile things become very, very much more important. It all makes common sense when you dig into it, but that produced various ideas, including the tiger scene, and then everything that Noonan did accosted me to it. And then working with Billy and working with the FBI, the lab scene is in the FBI's labs. So we had a lot of cooperation from behavioral science unit, and very impressive kind of forensic stuff that he did. So it was bringing the actors into character in a very strong way before we actually even started shooting.
Yeah, I was curious what kind of preparation Peterson did, because the thing about this movie is every scene Peterson is just completely convincing doing all of this stuff. So it's like, who did he talk to? Who did you put him in touch with? What did you make him study? Or what was this preparation like?
Well, I brought him into contact with Charlie Adamson and then some of the people at the FBI who actually did do this work, and then we did. He did never met Dennis Wayne Wallace, but we I spent a lot of time talking about it. This wasn't the kind of role. Will Smith became Ali. He worked for 10, 11 months in pre-production to become Ali, and maybe half of that was physical. The other half was all understanding Ali's rhetoric, which is very complicated because he is very witty. He's quite brilliant in his speech, and it's border South instead of deep South, and Ali's perception of politics at that time. That wasn't a Daniel, when we were doing Mohicans, same thing. We could immerse into an 18th century reality, learn how to master those tools, the tools of your character, which informs an act in a big way. There wasn't really that wasn't available for this, given the text.
And another thing, this movie, especially watching it tonight in 70mm print, the visual style is just gorgeous, and you're working here with Dante Spinati, who's one of the great cinematographers. What kinds of conversations did the two of you have about the guiding principles for the visual style?
Sorry, repeat that.
What kind of conversations did you have with Dante Spinati about the guiding principles for the visual style?
It was since it first occurred to me that I might want to be a film director, I was very attracted to the idea of using all the tools that are available and to impact upon audience with what I was imagining as powerfully as possible. That's what I want when I go to cinema. And so pushing what could be expressive, and communicate things, some of which audiences perceive. I believe audiences are quite brilliant, perceptually, much more so than they know. And if they see something that's wrong, they'll just generally have a disbelief. And if I ask them what made you disbelieve it, they don't really know. But they can't identify it. But nevertheless, we take in all of this data and sensory input. So for me, it's the inverse of that. I'm trying to put powerfully in terms of impact on the audience, but also in terms of veracity. And so I wind up spending a tremendous amount of time on some idle tasks like deciding what toaster Dollarhide should have in the kitchen, what the kitchen set should look like, because I want everything, he picked every single thing that's in his house. So everything is an expression of character. And, that part of it is interesting. I work with a fantastic Mel Bourne, fantastic production designer on this picture, and we're influenced by Lascaux, and that's the architecture, early Lascaux architecture. That's why those walls slant. There's not a right angle. The right angle is impresses us with rationality. There's not a right angle in that entire set. Everything is kind of acute angles, whether it's a chair by the kitchen table or the way the walls jut out towards the ceiling. And then some of it is informed by a typical kind of vocabulary of imagery and beliefs that people like Dollarhide or Dennis Wayne Wallace have. One is a preponderance of belief that, coming from early childhood, the mystery to identity is hidden in the spark inside the vacuum tubes in radios for the period, and also wearing aluminum foil to guard against being taken over by the other self, who probably wants to die as opposed to live. So it's quite common, and so some of that's expressed in the, I don't know how we got to talk about self-declaration, but some of this is
yeah. Well, no, I mean,
and the college,
I'm glad we did, because I think this is some of Mel Bourne's best work as a production designer, and he's a very legendary production designer. So that's saying something that it's just incredible. And I love the production design of Lecter's cell. I mean, talk a little bit about how you guys conceptualized that cell and came up with that just very stark white look that you wanted.
Well, the scene, I was influenced by Pillow Talk. And so I wanted him in comfy socks, kicking back on the pillow with his legs up, talking to Graham. I was taken by the irony of that. And I didn't want to go to something gothic or, so consequently we shot in the Hyde Museum, which Norman Foster's Hyde Museum in Atlanta. And just wanted everything to be absolutely white as just a platform to present Lecter in repose, And then some of the stuff also got expressed in the costume design, which, as I look at it today, I probably would have pulled back in a couple of places. But we're happily successful because when we were doing a tech check the other day, one of the scenes we happened to take a look at was the scene where Dollarhide takes Reba to the veterinarian, and there was just I forgot all about it, but there was something I did like about the tiger, his shape, and then Reba, and then the veterinarian, and Dollarhide wearing a shirt that was very similar to look like a tiger stripes or something, and so it also manifests itself in a lot of costume design. So.
Yeah, I can honestly say I was not expecting Pillow Talk as an influence on Manhunter. Intentionally ironic influence. Well, and this was, as far as I remember, one of the first, if not the first times Brian Cox ever appeared in an American movie. So how did you become aware of him?
That's an interesting story. Brian Dennehy, the late Brian Dennehy, was a terrific stage actor and also a great character actor who I used in the Jericho Mile. Wanted to play Lecter and campaigned for it, and I was pretty much decided that he was going to do it. And then I got a phone call from him in New York, and he said, I'm going to prove to you what a good friend I am. You know how much I want to do Lecter? I said, yeah. He said, there's somebody better. You've got to go see this guy, this new actor called Brian Cox, in a play called Rat in the Skull. And he's the guy, and I did, and I thought Brian was fantastic. That's how I cast him.
Tell me a little bit about your use of music in this movie, because I love your scores in Thief and this. I love these sort of heavy synthesizer scores. How do you're talking about learning to communicate with actors. How do you communicate with a composer to get what you want?
With more difficulty than I communicate with the actors. So, because I have a musical sensibility, but I don't know composition, and I can't really play an instrument very well. But from when I first began, I very much wanted to have a music in mind before I shoot, because it becomes kind of a poetic modular of what the film is, so that when things get very complex, I want a reminder of here's how I'm supposed to feel in terms of a net emotional result. I can go back to a particular piece of music. So I always like to get the music ahead of time. So I knew I was going to use Shriekback. They blossomed into this group. There's about 4 cuts of theirs in here. And some of the lyrics work like a libretto in an opera. They're really quite extraordinary how they relate to the action. And then there's this one song from Revs. So the selection happens actually before I shot the movie. And I knew I was going to use Tangerine Dream before I did Thief.
So if you're planning the music ahead of time and you're so meticulous about again, set decoration and your shots and everything, how many surprises are there for you when you get to the editing room? Are there things, when you're in editorial, do things kind of lay out as you expect, or are you surprised? Are there surprises and discoveries?
The editing is, for me, I always view editing as the third time I'm writing the film, authoring the film, and kind of from the Russian or the Eisenstein perspective, that the film really gets made in montage in the editing room, and all you're doing ahead of time is getting all the things you need to construct the film in the editing room according to the so obviously the script and what it determines where the entire picture is going. It's the genome of everything, and also when it's well written is there's the Act 3 ending, Act 2 ending, Act 1 ending. I tend to work backwards. I tend to work in reverse in terms of conceiving narrative. But then everything it has to work editorially, and like my friend Dov Honig was the editor on this, and and so everything, if things change, and they continue to change, there's a couple of director's cuts that are different than this. And I think Canal Plus is redoing we're going to restore and reissue Manhunter. No, there's going to be some changes. There's some scenes. There's some explanations that Graham does with the Atlanta Police Department that are kind of a powerful axis of understanding exactly what he's doing and why he's doing it, that I find very poignant and put back in. And there was a scene at the end of the film when he's with Joan Allen, and he doesn't talk in another version of this. And instead we see him drive someplace, and the family reacts, and it's Patricia Charbonneau and one of the families that Dollarhide had scouted, and he just wants to see them. And it's the first time we see his face, and it's much more battered than we see here. And I like that. Yes, a number of changes.
So why did you take those scenes out from the version that was released theatrically?
Bad judgment. But that happens, So I think, I mean, one of the few films I've never changed the frame on, Heat, Insider, Mohicans I've changed. The best version of Mohicans is probably the last, which is a little bit shorter.
Well, this movie was so influential, and obviously is, so beloved. Over 30 years later, you still can fill a theater. How was it received when it was released? Was it popular?
One of the it got very good reviews, and in review sensitive cities like LA, we did very well in theaters in Westwood. When working with Dino, who was really a character, and I loved him and I fought with him at the same time. We had a marketing budget that was microscopic, so it really didn't perform very well. He primarily sold off foreign early on, and so it was left to its own. So it didn't do much box office at all.
Well, I guess before I let you go, I'm curious. I know you've got Ferrari coming out, which we're all very excited about. So, do you know what you've got coming? What you're going to start working on next after that, or are you just right now worried about getting Ferrari out in the world?
Well, last year I wrote a novel. He was Met Gardner. Called Heat 2, and that's probably what's next.
Well, thank you so much for coming out and talking with us and showing this gorgeous print. I mean, it was really fantastic to see in 70 millimeter. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.